All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome aboard this, let's call it a very unusual historical tour of the United Kingdom. We're going to be skipping the usual landmarks today. Instead, we are diving headfirst into some of the most shocking and, frankly, just plain weird facts that make Britain what it is.
And we are kicking things off with a real head scratcher. I mean, forget about keeping quiet in a library. There's a place in the UK where you're not even supposed to breathe your last. Any ideas? It's a pretty famous spot.
That's right, the Palace of Westminster, the very heart of British democracy, the Houses of Parliament. It sounds like a punchline to a joke, doesn't it? But it's a genuine rule, and it is the perfect way to start our little journey into Britain's eccentric side. Okay, so here we are at our first official stop. We're stepping into the labyrinth of British law, a place where centuries of tradition have cooked up some truly peculiar rules that are, technically, still on the books today.
So you might be asking, why all the weird laws? Well, it's pretty interesting. See, unlike most countries that have one big single written constitution, the UK's legal system is more like a patchwork quilt. It's woven together from different laws, court decisions, and just really old traditions. This kind of setup is the perfect breeding ground for historical oddities to hang around. And this leads to some truly strange results. So we've got our rule about not dying in Parliament, but there's also the Salmon Act of 1986. And this makes it a crime to handle a salmon in suspicious circumstances. Now, what exactly makes a fish look suspicious? Well, that is, of course, open to some very, very British interpretation. But believe it or not, there's actually a strange logic behind the Parliament rule. The Palace of Westminster is technically a royal palace. That means anyone who dies inside could be entitled to a full-blown state funeral, which is a huge, expensive affair. So the law is really just a very practical, if kind of morbid, bit of admin. All right, leaving the strange laws behind us, our tour now moves on to the strange possessions of the crown. We're about to explore the really surprising and far-reaching influence of the monarchy, where ancient powers give them ownership over some pretty unexpected things. For example, get this, because of a law from the 14th century that is still in effect, all the whales, porpoises, and dolphins in the waters around the UK are called fishes royal. And you know what that means? They technically belong to the monarch. So yes, King Charles legally owns the dolphins. Now, just have a look at this number. 38. What on earth in a whole nation's history could possibly be measured by the number 38? A battle? A treaty? Let's see. 38 minutes. Yep, that's how long the Anglo-Zanzibar War of 1896 lasted, making it the shortest recorded war in all of history. It's just this bizarre little footnote from the peak of the British Empire, a whole conflict that was over in less time than it takes to watch an episode of your favorite sitcom. For our third stop, we're headed into London. Now, this city is absolutely packed with history, but some of its most famous landmarks and institutions are totally misunderstood. So we're here to set the record straight. Okay, here's a classic. Everyone points to that famous clock tower and says, "Look, there's Big Ben." But they're wrong. Big Ben is actually the nickname for the massive Great Bell that's inside the tower. The tower itself is called the Elizabeth Tower. It's a little detail that every Londoner just loves to correct tourists on. Now, let's head underground, where we find another piece of living history. When the London Underground, or the Tube, opened way back in 1863, it was a totally revolutionary idea. It was the first subway system on the entire planet. It's a great reminder that London has been a hub for innovation for a really long time. And speaking of London's treasures, take a look at this number, over 170. What could London possibly have so many of? That's how many museums you can find just in the capital. And what's even more amazing is that many of the biggest and best ones, like the British Museum or the Natural History Museum, are completely free to enter. It makes world-class history and culture accessible to absolutely everyone. For our final stop on this tour, we're going to zoom in on the daily habits and quirky stats that really define modern British life. This is where all that history and tradition bumps up against the everyday. Let's kick this off with a mind-boggling figure, 100 million. What do the British do 100 million times every single day? Well, they drink tea. That's how many cups are drunk in the UK daily. It's not just a beverage, it's a cultural institution. It's the solution to every problem and the punctuation mark for every part of the day. And for our very last fact, this one's a bit of a shocker. Forget the royal family, forget the politicians, because statistically speaking, the chickens are in charge. Yes, you are reading that right. There are more chickens in the UK than there are people. So we've seen laws about dying, we've talked about royal dolphins, lightning-fast wars, and a nation that is apparently fueled by tea and outnumbered by chickens. But what does it all mean? And that's really the key takeaway from our tour. These aren't just random, funny facts you can use to win a trivia night. Each one is a little thread in a much bigger tapestry. They're like windows into the country's unique history, its unwritten constitution, its long-standing monarchy, and its deep-rooted cultural habits. They're the eccentricities that make Britain, well, British. So as our tour comes to an end, I'll leave you with this to think about. From suspicious salmon to a bell that isn't a tower, which of these strange historical threads did you find the most surprising? Thanks for joining me on this very British tour.